Hello, this is the basic timeline and sequence of events that I use here at Grown Veg in the UK that enables me to get 2 crops of vegetables from 1 bucket using the same soil in the same growing year. If you're gardening in the UK, you should be able to do this. If you're gardening anywhere other than the UK, you might still be able to do it, but you might need to adjust the timeline to suit the growing conditions in the country that you garden in. So let me go through this through the whole year and show you how we achieve these 2 crops of vegetables from the same soil, in the same bucket, in the same year. Shall we start in January? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's start in January. So here in the UK, we're in the winter months. It's January. We're going to sow some leek seeds and we're going to sow them indoors. Okay. We've also got our early potatoes and we're going to chit those early potatoes. So that's what's happening in January here in the UK at Grown Veg. If we go down to the bottom here, you'll see this line here, and this line represents some winter composting that's ongoing. That was started last year, but it's still ongoing. I'll explain that in a bit more detail as we get to the other side of this timeline. Okay, so we go through the winter months, January, February. The leeks are growing on indoors, the seed leeks are growing on. The early potatoes are producing chits, and by the time we get to March, April, May, which is the spring of the year, in the United Kingdom, we've moved from a cold, dark winter months to warmer and getting brighter spring months. So we're ready to move the seed leeks, the leek plants. They can go outdoors now. We can start narding those off. So we can move those outdoors in their growing containers. The early potatoes, we can start and plant those in the buckets. Okay, so we're actually planting the early potatoes in the buckets and they're going outdoors, and we're moving the leek seeds, the leek plants, they're going outdoors. Now, in the event there is a frost in spring of the year, these can be moved back indoors. The 10-inch buckets that I use are quite light and they're easily moved back into the garage, and so are the leeks. So we can avoid a frost by simply moving these back indoors. Okay, right, we move on through now and we're now into the summer months. Okay, these early potatoes will have grown on 3 months now, so we'll have had those in 12 weeks. So we're getting into June, July and August of the year, which is usually the hottest months in the United Kingdom, and it's much brighter. And the potatoes are growing now, and we have potato plants, and we may be able to harvest some of those. So we start to empty out buckets and we harvest the early potatoes. Now what we're left with at this point is the early potatoes that we've harvested, some empty buckets and some soil. Okay, but we're still in the summer of the year. So what we do is we add some fertiliser to that soil, we put the soil back in the buckets, and those leeks that we've been growing on, we transplant those leeks into the buckets. So if we go back up the timeline and see how old these leeks are now, we sowed them in January, So they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 6 months old, those leeks. So they're now starting to be about the thickness of a pencil perhaps, maybe the thickness of this pointer that I'm using. But we now pot those up. They go into the bucket using the soil that the potatoes have grown in with some added fertiliser. So now we're growing leeks in those buckets. Okay, and as we progressively empty potatoes from buckets, we progressively plant leeks into those buckets. Now, if you don't want to do leeks, you could probably do celery, but you need something that will grow on through the autumn and into the winter months. Celery and leeks will both do that. But at the start here, instead of sowing leek seeds, sow some celery seeds. It's exactly the same procedure. Okay, so we're moving now into the autumn of the year in the UK. September, October, November. So it's starting to get cool now, and it's starting to get darker. We're losing the daylight hours. We've probably harvested all the early potatoes. We've got all the leeks in the buckets that we intend planting, and we now might actually be able to harvest some of these leeks because now they'll be 8 or 9 months old and they may be big enough to harvest. So we're going to harvest leeks progressively through the autumn and into the winter. And that would apply to celery if you chose celery rather than leeks. Now what we're going to do? Well, we've got the same situation we had 3 or 4 months ago. We've now taken the leeks out. We've got some empty pots, we've got some soil. What are we going to do with that? It has to go somewhere, but we can't plant anything in it because it's autumn, because it's cool, because it's getting darker and colder. Nothing's going to grow now. So what we do is we put that soil back in the bucket. Now then, we're in autumn. The autumn leaves have fallen. We've gathered autumn leaves. We've taken the last cut from the lawn, and because I live quite close to the seashore, I've been down and collected some seaweed. If you can't do that, it doesn't matter. Leaves and grass will do. What we're going to do now is, these empty buckets, we're going to fill them with soil. The soil that's just come out, it has to go somewhere. And we're going to do a chop and drop of winter compost on the top of those buckets. So the grass cuttings and the leaves, we're going to mix them, chop them up, and just put a couple of handfuls on the top of the soil in the buckets. What we're actually doing now, we're winter composting, and that will take us through till the beginning of next year. Okay, so that winter compost will have sat on those pots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. It'll be broken down by the worms and the anything that lives in the soil, and it'll have been taken down into the soil and it'll have enriched the soil. And look where we are now. We're back up to wanting to plant early potatoes. So we've had 6 months worth of composting going on the top of our buckets with soil in. And as any gardener will tell you, the best soil in the garden is the soil at the bottom of the compost pile. Well, we've got it in a bucket, haven't we? We've got it in a bucket. And we go back up here to the beginning of March, where we start all over again. But we're now using the soil in the bucket from the previous year that's had 6 months worth of composting on top of it. And basically what we'll do is, at this point, We'll empty this out of the bucket into a barrel. We'll spark it up with some fertiliser. We'll put it back in the bucket and we'll start again. How good is that? How good is that? So, if you want to have a go at this, as I've already said, if you're in the UK, this is a timeline that you could probably use. You would move starting planting dates and sowing dates and harvesting dates either forward or back, depending on the type of spring or summer we're having. These are not hard and fixed, but that sequence line is a line that you can work to. And if you're not gardening in the UK, then clearly winter, spring, summer, autumn will not align with some of these months that I've given you. Just align the months and just try and follow that sequence of events, and that'll get you from one growing year to the next. And look what you'll have achieved. You'll have grown 2 crops. You'll be winter composting. It's the way to go. Trust me, it's the way to go. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is Grown Veg signing out.